So we are hearing from employers across the state that they're having difficulty filling the job openings that they have because there's no housing available in the communities where they have jobs. People ought to know that the housing shortage might look differently in different parts of the state, right? We have a shortage of high quality housing that's affordable for workers in the central cities of Milwaukee and Green Bay and Janesville, where you have older housing that really needs repair and rehabilitation. But the shortage is also in the rural areas and in small towns and in fast-growing job centers. Together, those shortages mean that house prices are going up faster than incomes, rents are going up faster than incomes, and particularly workers on the lower end of the wage scale are getting squeezed. So affordability is declining and workers are unable to live near where they work. So the housing shortage might look a little different in different parts of the state, but it's really a crisis that is affecting all areas of the state and really affecting our economic competitiveness to attract and retain workers. It's this fundamental question a local government should ask: can people who work in my community afford to live in my community so that they can send their kids to the schools, and that strengthens the neighborhood and it strengthens the community and the school system. To address the housing shortage, we do need a partnership between local governments and the state, and between employers and nonprofits. So for local governments, it means looking at your housing supply and asking the question whether there are enough housing units near where jobs are located or near transit to get workers to jobs, and if not, to examine your zoning regulations to allow more development. For the state government, it means adopting legislation and regulations that encourage or require local governments to adequately meet their workforce housing needs. And included in that would be various sorts of tax incentives or financial incentives to developers and to municipalities to build more workforce housing near where jobs are located. So one of the ways that employers can help to address the workforce housing shortage is through down payment assistance program, particularly for first-time home buyers, to help them enter into that entry-level housing product. Employers can also talk to their local communities about making sure that the market is able to provide that entry-level housing, the smaller house, the kind of starter home that seems to be in such short supply. This can also include employers helping local governments understand that multifamily housing or rental housing is going to be part of the equation to attract and retain workers. And when workers live in the communities where they work, that helps to strengthen the community bonds, it improves the tax base, it reduces turnover. That's a positive for the community and for the economic development in the region.
Right now, most of the employers we're hearing from are suffering from workforce shortages in all areas, but primarily in the high skill areas and in the lower skill areas. Most of them are cutting back production. They're looking at alternative ways to try to get their product manufactured or made or shipped. Automation has become something they're starting to invest in. But again, if you don't have someone to run and fix automation equipment, you can't use that in order to be successful in your business. The technical colleges have to become more flexible, more nimble. We've been working on that quite a bit. We've been trying to chunk our pathways up so that we can offer them in smaller, quicker pieces. We also have been looking at the fact that over 50% of our students are part-time. So they're already working. They're already trying to make it a go in the workforce, and they're seeing us as someone who can help them on a part-time basis upload their skills. I think the technical colleges have to take a significant look at how important will diplomas and degrees be in 20 years. Will it be based more on your competencies and what you're able to show and demonstrate, as opposed to having an actual diploma or degree that you put on your wall? We have to really look at what our employers are telling us in terms of what they actually need to get their workforce up to speed. We are definitely hearing from our employers that they need more on-site training that's customized to meet exactly their needs, and that's done just in time in terms of as their system works and as their timing works. We're able to fit it in, we're able to upskill very quickly, and then move them on to the next part of their journey. We actually have full-time faculty who work at companies providing training just in time, on site, and in exactly what the companies need. And I think that trend's only going to continue. It's credit-based learning that they're looking for. They want assessment. They want to know that if they're going to invest on training on their site, that people are learning what they say they're learning. We need to listen to what employers are saying they need. And then we need to be willing to go back and say, I can provide that, but I need your help to do this. We have a much smaller pot in order to try to innovate. We have to do more reallocations. We have to try to prioritize which parts of the degrees and diplomas we offer needs the next upgrade or the next new step. So is it a simulator in nursing that needs to be upgraded, or is it that we need robotic welders because that's where manufacturing is going? That financial constraint means we really have to sometimes make very tough choices, and all of our employers need us to upgrade in everything they're doing. So it makes it tough for them and for us. I think a part of the conversation we're not having right now is how are we going to help rural companies survive? They have a lack of population to begin with, and now they need people, they need trained people, but there aren't high-tech facilities nearby, and there aren't the support systems in place that you find in the larger cities in Wisconsin. So how are we going to fix that problem?
I definitely see a sense of urgency. I know that there have been conversations in different sectors of companies that may want to move here, but their question is always who's going to work for them. Similar to other communities, the aging population is one of them in terms of the demographics. Our population growth is kind of flat over time, looking out ahead, so the low in-migration is certainly relevant there too. Healthcare, there's an obvious need for healthcare, but finding people who will have a flexible schedule, who are highly qualified, and who are able to dedicate themselves to the high expectations you have to meet within a regulatory framework, which is incredibly difficult to navigate, and knowing that there's less difficult jobs with higher wages in that same realm, it's incredibly difficult to keep people in that realm. So you're always using temporary help, and that adds more cost. You also see a bit of a generational gap within the public sector where a lot of senior management and people have been at the county for 30, 40 years, they'll be soon retiring, and then who's coming in behind them? We're in the midst of it now, and we feel that every single time we have senior management positions, it's a challenge. Burnout is a real factor, and I've talked to all my department heads, and almost all of them cited burnout as something that they're having to deal with. Whether that's increased caseloads at Health and Human Services with child welfare cases, which is a very real and dramatic thing that people are having to deal with. Public safety, you've got increased caseloads for drugs and all these other things that you still don't have as many people for. The dispatch centers, their calls are going up exponentially because people just pick up the phone and call with something. Maybe it's an emergency, maybe it's not. I think part of the challenge is how do you address that near-term reality, whether it's in the public sector or in the private sector with markets, and meet those needs at the same time that your ability to meet them is getting restricted. Our ability to generate revenue or keep up even with inflation is restricted. And after, say, 10 years of being behind on just inflation, not to say anything about increases in the cost of doing business elsewhere, you find yourself ill-equipped to meet people where they're at when they come in from the private sector or with years of experience or things like that. So that's a really confining aspect that drives a lot of the challenges that I see from department to department. If you don't have the right people in the right spot with the appropriate expertise who can maintain everything you need, a lot of this falls apart. I get these questions of economic development all the time, and I think there's an expectation that maybe the public sector is keeping up with the private sector. Like people see it's a generally good economy. People can find jobs, so the expectation is the government is doing well at the same time, but we're not.
I think the workforce shortages are certainly something that all constituents are dealing with right now. The workforce shortage comes up in nearly every conversation that we have. The Higher Education Regional Alliance And of course, that involves the M7 region, those 7 counties that surround Milwaukee. And we've been coming together now for a year and a half on a monthly basis to think about these issues and how we can join forces and make a bigger impact. We know these issues are too big for any of us to tackle alone. And I think that the biggest takeaway is we know that this is not going to solve itself, and we know that we're going to have to partner, all of us, in order to address it. Oftentimes, especially in higher education, we've been known as attracting that talent of 18 to 22-year-old. And we do that really well. And then we know we have to broaden our recruiting pool. So right now we all have the places where we typically recruit, and we know that we have to look differently and think differently about how we recruit. We've got to think differently, not just about the traditional model of how we teach, but also who we're recruiting. And so we need to be thinking about geographic regions, but also our demographics of outside the 18 to 22-year-old and how we recruit as well. Maybe the other thing I think that our employers need to be thinking about, is the changing demographic and the changing mindset of the young people coming out of colleges today. And so, we can talk about it generationally, and we can try to stereotype them in generation Gen Z, Gen Y. I see every day our students, and they're energetic, and they're enthusiastic, and they've got big hopes and so forth. But they are different. There's no question about it. Young people today are different, and what they want in their employers are different. And so our employers now more than ever are going to have to be flexible about meeting the needs of this young workforce that's out there today. So I would just add that to the mix, that our employers need to be flexible and make sure that they understand the generational differences of the workforce today.
I've really heard it from every region of the state that there's a labor shortage, and I know this group has talked about it for quite some time. Some of it's the demographics, and we've seen it coming. In the private sector, with the folks that we're contracting with, we hear it all the time. That they're having trouble retaining and attracting the skill and the people that they need for their jobs. It is something that the economy is going to have, the private sector is going to have to react to. And I know there's a lot of trucking companies now that are they're marketing themselves to their employees to make themselves more attractive. The bulk of the way we're funded is through user fees, predominantly the gas tax and registration fees here in Wisconsin. And since the end of the Great Recession, we have seen vehicle miles traveled actually go up a little bit every year. So, that has held pace so far. Registration fees, as we project, there's some concern about that moving forward. But I think just in general, for our cities, villages, towns, and counties, they're property tax based. They fund about 80% of their transportation based on that. So those eroding tax bases are going to have an impact at different levels. I don't think there's any question about it. I think you're going to see the eroding tax base affect, the locals and their ability to maintain streets. With the gas tax at the state and federal level, as we change to more hybrids and more fuel efficient and electric cars, that's eventually going to have an impact as well. There's two sides with transportation and workforce. It's about the ability to provide the transportation network and the workforce that does that. But there's also what transportation can do to help solve some of the workforce challenges. And I think if you look at, in a lot of our urbanized areas and that, better access to mass transit is what a lot of cities are looking at across this country to be able to attract and retain young talent. The money that we were able to get in the last budget for passenger rail, we're going to be able to add more trips on the Hiawatha line between Milwaukee and Chicago. And I know for our major employers down in that area, they've indicated that's a game changer for them to be able to attract and get the talent that they want down in that area.
I'd like to start maybe on the education side and maybe throw a few statistics out and have maybe Patty and Cindy respond to these. When we did the report a few years ago, we were graduating about 60% of the students that came into the UW system in 5 years. One stat that we thought was pretty interesting is the state was losing 60% of our graduating engineers. Problem number one. The other thing that we saw back when we put the report together is, I think if I recall correctly, the technical college system in the state had about 90 or 91,000 students at that point in time. Of the 90 or 91,000 total students, 34,000 already had a 4-year degree. Now, you have to believe, I think, that some of that 40% that did make it through the UW system ended up in the technical college system. Another stat that was very strong to us was we lose 14,000 high school students every year to drop out. And it's primarily due to the fact when we question those kids, they don't really see a future because of the fact that they've lost their self-esteem, they can't read well, write well. And the technical college system and the UW system have to do a lot of remediation, even for the students that do graduate from high school. So the question I really have is, we don't have the luxury of swinging and missing. And I see that we are swinging and missing by not getting the kids out of high school, by getting the kids focused in the right direction first. How do we overcome that? How do we correct that situation?
Wow, there's a good first question. I think there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle, right? So in high schools, we're doing a lot to try to get further down and discuss careers with them, not discuss just jobs, and give them opportunities to actually do things like welding and those kinds of things. I think that's part of the answer, right? They get exposed earlier, hopefully they like it. Maybe they see it in a different context. So we do, with young kids, we do welding as art, right? Well, that's a whole different view of welding if you think of it as an artistic format. And if you talk to any manufacturer as welding, they'll tell you it's an art form. And so trying to change how things are viewed is part of the answer. The largest division at our college is our learner support area. That's ABE, GED, adult basic ed type skills. That tells you something right there about what's coming into the college, and we're doing a lot to try to integrate them sooner, so it's not here and go learn for 2 years how to read better and then we'll teach you welding. It's how do we teach you welding and teach you how to read at the same time. I also agree with you that we have a lot of students who come to us with 4 years degrees. They got their 4-year degree, had a great time, but couldn't find what they were looking for necessarily. Now they need to find something that will actually help them get employed. So we love that happens. Feel free to encourage any of them to come to us. But does it solve the shortage? No. Most of our students are part-time at the technical college system. Over 60% of ours are. So they're already working and trying to make a go of it. And I'm not sure. The other issue, is poverty. We have a tremendous amount, 3/4 of our students are technically in poverty coming to us. So how do you train them when they're not eating? And that's a significant issue, especially in rural colleges, that we have to try to figure out how to tackle.
That's a great question, Tim, and I agree with what you said, Patty. One of the things that I mentioned in my introductory remarks was about HERA, which is the Higher Education Regional Alliance. It is comprised of the 18 higher ed institutions, public, private, 2-year, 4-year, all of us, that are in the M7 region. And as I mentioned, we have been coming together for 18 months to try to look at some of these issues and try to tackle them and collaborate. So we've talked about collaboration as a key. It is an important answer to how we're going to address these problems that we're talking about this morning. And one of the things that we've talked about too, Tim, in response to your question is we have a lot of students. You talked about the dropout rate, but we also have a lot of students who enter our classrooms in higher education at all of these levels, the 2 years, the 4 years, that don't retain. And the answers for the workplace shortages, bodies are one thing, but also making sure that we put them in the right position. So one of the things that we're looking at coming together, engineering's been mentioned, nursing's been mentioned today, are how many of these programs we offer within our areas, our own institutions, and how many are you putting out, and how many are you putting out, and what is it that we can do ourselves, and how much more can we do with collaboration with our partners in corporations who need engineers, and our companies that and hospitals that need the nursing hires. So we've been meeting with those CEOs, and we've been having conversations about collaborations for how we can make this happen, because we can't do it alone in higher ed. It takes a partnership to develop a nurse, and we have to have clinical placements. And if they can't, and if they're saturated already, we have to come together and do more. So we know a couple of things. We have to do better, and so this is where our alliance has been coming into place with looking at the best practices and making assurances that we're all in this together to put the structures in place that will give us better outputs on retention. So more of our students who come into our higher ed classrooms will retain and actually graduate. That's number one, getting them out, and then into those positions where we know that they're needed most. So some of the things that I would answer your question is that takes true collaboration on all fronts, and then looking at again the numbers where these workers are needed. Rather than bodies are one thing, but then we have to put them in the right places too.
Yeah, thank you. Chris, what are you doing specifically in Portage? What programs, what initiatives do you have to bring your county together, both on a public and private side, to move the needle?
Well, there's a lot of different partnerships happening within the county, which are good to see. We're lucky as counties go in that we have a fairly robust private sector for a relatively small county, population-wise. So we see a lot of pipelines from high schools to the larger businesses in the area, giving students that kind of experience. They go and work, get a sense of what it's like. Some of it's just kind of familiarity. Other parts of it are more hands-on, actually get the skills. That program is working well and expanding in its scope. So trying to facilitate that as best you can. A lot of it is just trying to see the county's role tends to be peripheral a lot of the time because, you know, the house is on fire, sort of zero-sum game of survival is what we're grappling with most of the time. But in terms of, I mean, you saw it in Marathon County, you saw it in Portage County, and I'm sure other counties as well, where even this nonprofit element, which is a key part of the equation, I think, these counties, including ours, cut the funding that we were giving to these nonprofits because you're forced with a decision of, do I take money from county agencies or non-county agencies? And in that scenario, a lot of counties are saying, well, I can't, you know, if 70% of my budget's wrapped up in mandatory services, I can't easily just siphon money away from that into something that is discretionary, though highly valued and effective. And so that's becoming an issue in terms of our role at the county level. Similarly with the private sector, I think you were dead on earlier when you said that the private sector needs to step up, because I think that it's not always articulated as well as it should be, the sort of scaffolding effect of the success. So like if the public sector is in a better position, then private sector is better positioned for near and long-term success. Right now it's more, you know, whether it's public policy or anything related to what we do, and it's across a very broad spectrum, it tends to be more zero-sum, more let's get this policy in place that benefits me and my industry, and the public sector is, you know, there, but not the role that we can play to kind of facilitate is not always appreciated, let's say. So not an easy question to answer, but hopefully that's okay.
Oh, thanks. Craig, transportation. I think, obviously, don't take this the wrong way. When I was growing up as a young boy in the state of Wisconsin, we had absolutely the best roads in the country. This is a kind of a trick question, but one of the things that we talked about a lot is, why do we try to pay for everything ourselves here in the state of Wisconsin when we go across the border into Illinois and we're dropping money into a toll booth? Has that question come up from a funding standpoint? And then secondarily, which is maybe more of a federal question, where are we at from a labor standpoint to meet our transportation, construction needs, and maintenance needs here in the state?
Sure. So on the first question, yeah, it's come up once or twice. You know, Steve Walters could probably tell you that. Without, you know, we just went through a budget debate where we came up with a compromise where we did get some new ongoing revenue for the first time really in 16 years. So happy about that. What the administration had proposed was to increase the gas tax in order to do that, which I think would have gotten at what you were talking about, that Bears fans and Vikings fans and Lions fans, as they come to watch their teams lose at Lambeau, would help defray those costs and pay for that. Another way to do that is tolling. That gets a little more complicated. We could do some tolling if we added a lane. We could toll that for capacity, or we could toll some bridges. But we couldn't just toll our interstates right now because there's federal laws against that. Illinois and others got, it's complicated why some of them were able to do that. But back in the 50s when we took the money, we said it would be a freeway system, and you couldn't charge for it again. So there's a lot of debate about that, the federal level of lifting that, because now all of these interstates are at the end of their useful life and need to be rebuilt. And if the federal government isn't going to step up with more money again, then perhaps they should allow the locals to do that as well. But so those are some of the debates on that. As far as the workforce side, really to me, when I look at it at the DOT, we come at it, I think, kind of from three ways. As an employer, we have a little over 3,200 employees. And from that standpoint, we have trouble competing. And I said before, with the labor shortage that's coming, and I've heard Dennis Winters, ringing the bell about this for many years. And the only thing Dennis had said that was maybe more certain than the Y2K was that as we got to this, that elected officials would take credit that we have a low unemployment rate for that labor shortage. But we've known this is coming, and so it is hard for us to compete because the private sector is going to react to that and do some things, whether it's engineers or whether it's in our Department of Motor Vehicles, whether it's in folks doing real estate. So, we're doing our best to make it a great place to work, to have innovation, but it's also the changing needs of the skills that we're going to have at the department. Like everybody, we have so much of our senior management that's eligible to retire in the next 4 to 5 years, and the knowledge management of that is going to we have to find ways to pass that on as they go. And so last 2 weeks ago, there was two individuals that retired. One was a deputy director down here in the South region. Another one was in Central area. And one day we had 70 years of experience walk out the door. You don't replace that easily. But at the same time, for the people we have coming in, the changing needs of the job, data scientists, IT is not going to be a separate section at DOTs across the country because of the nature of the way transportation's evolving and the things that are going to be coming with connected and automated vehicles and intelligent transportation systems, artificial intelligence, 3D, all of these things that the skills that a lot of these employees are going to have are going to include a lot of those areas they haven't in the past. It's not just engineering. And then the second area is we're a contractor. We don't provide directly a lot of the things ourselves. Some we do, but we contract out with engineering firms and contract in road building firms. And we hear it from the trades that they're having trouble getting the people. And when we talk about engineers, kind of getting back to your first question, Tim, I've talked to so many consulting engineering firms that there have been other states that came up with other packages to begin to rebuild their infrastructure, and we were losing all kinds of engineers going to those states because there was projects going on, and we lost a fair number of them to that. Luckily, a lot of that you can do remotely, so you've got people sitting here in Wisconsin designing things in Nevada, and that's so. Now that we're bringing some back, hopefully we can retain some of them. So I guess, but then the third area I look at is I talked about briefly in the intro is that I think from transportation, from a labor standpoint, can be part of either the problem or the solution. And as we're vying for talent to come to this state versus the other 49, a lot of that is the amenities and things that young people are looking for, and public transportation has a lot to do with that. And so I think we've got a lot of work to do in that area, to be candid about that.
It's interesting. I was just reading a report over the weekend about the fact millennials don't own anything. It's either Uber or public transportation, and as you know, in the state of Wisconsin, ours is somewhat limited. Kurt, you're in urban and regional planning. What are we missing? What should we be doing differently?
I think just to echo what Chris and Secretary Thompson said, if you think about, a lot of what we're talking about is not rocket science. You have to have workforce development and transportation and housing working together. You have to get people to jobs, get them trained, and that means they either live near jobs or they take transit, right? And our transit systems, our transportation systems, our education systems, these are all systems that have worked pretty well, but they're showing their age and they need continuous investment. So
I can say this as a professor because I don't have to get elected, but a lot of the investments and creativity is going to be cities, villages, towns, and counties, which have been squeezed for revenue. Now, we can debate whether that is because they spend too much or they need alternative revenue sources, but any investment that promotes economic development and brings these factors together is going to require some public sector investment. And I think we have to be willing to say that our competitive states, even our neighboring state to the west, they spend more on a lot of these issues and they show better results. So in terms of housing, right, we hear all the time, I go around and I speak, and we have, Barron County, the economic development director told me they have 200 jobs they could fill today, but no housing. I was speaking at the league, and a mayor came up to me and said, I have 100 jobs open right now, but we haven't built a single housing unit in our state, in our city, for 20 years, right? So the workforce shortage leads to a housing shortage, and the housing shortage leads to a workforce shortage, because just like Secretary Thompson was saying, in the construction and building trades, whether that's commercial or residential or new construction or rehab, there's a huge shortage of labor, skilled labor in particular in the trades, and so these factors go together. So the planner in me says that if you look forward to what is the situation where we want, it's going to take a concerted investments to get there.
Thanks. And Jim, just one last comment before we turn over to Q&A. And this is kind of a little bit off script, but when we were putting the report together, we have a very large captive workforce in the state of Wisconsin that's untapped. They happen to be in prison. And we started to put some things in the report about how we needed to engage with our prison system. There was huge pushback because of the limited dollars that were available for training. When we sold the company in 2011, we had 900 workers on our floor. 28% were Hispanic, 12% were previously incarcerated, and I can tell you they were some of our best employees. So something for a later discussion when we talk about the public sector.
You bet.